The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, welcome to today's webinar on creating inclusive events. I'm Remy Merriman, the Marketing Director at Hub, and I'll be your moderator today. Our goal is to provide you with valuable information that you can use when creating your next event. Presenting today is Allie Magyar, CEO of Hub. Allie is an entrepreneur and event management expert with over 15 years of experience leading companies and planning events for organizations around the world. She founded Hub to build a technology solution that directly addressed the needs of meeting planners to help them manage the overload of information for their event. And you'll also be hearing today from Nancy Meadows, who's Hub's People Champion and winner of the 2016 Portland Business Journal's HR Excellence Award. Nancy recently served as an accessibility consultant for one of the largest IT professional conferences in the world, and she'll be sharing some of her lessons from that experience. So just a few housekeeping items before we get started. The webinar will be recorded, and both the recording and slides will be made available within a few days, and all registrants will be emailed a link to access that recording and slides. All attendees today will also be muted during the call, but we do want you to participate. So if you have any questions, go ahead and submit them via the questions box in the GoToMeeting app, and we'll answer as many as possible at the end. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Allie.
Great. Thanks, Remy. And hello, everyone. Happy Tuesday. I can't believe it's already Tuesday. Monday seemed to just completely zoom by. I'm excited to be here with you today talking about the inclusive crowd and how we can focus on creating events that bring value to our attendees across the board. So today we'll talk a little bit about our audiences and how we can define our audiences and then get into some specifics as well. But I think all of us know that our attendees don't all look and feel the same. And this is different from year to year, event to event. It can mean changing things in your business where maybe your audience is changing and the people that are using your product or service or our members are changing as well. So one thing that we do know for sure, and I think any of us in events can agree to this, is that events never stay the same. They're always changing, and our audience is a really big part of that as well. So we need to sort of shift our mindset in terms of looking at our audience as a very diverse audience. Not only are there a lot of different cultures, but there's also a difference in learning styles, approaches to work, physical needs. And a one-size-fits-all event really isn't enough because you could place the same person in the same event, and if you tweak just a few very minor things, they could end up leaving with a lot of additional value and having a richer experience on site and with that really valuable use of their investment of time. And so I always like to challenge myself as I'm looking at events of how can we innovate? How can we really understand our audience? And then what is the low-hanging fruit? Because a lot of times I'm always scared because budgets are always less and we always expect more. So I like to really start to get to know our audiences to understand what are the small things that we can do for them that don't cost budget but really enhance that experience. And as a part of that, looking at designing inclusive events that appeal to everybody and maximize the power of that time spent on site. So we talked about a few of the different ways that our attendees are different, but cultures is a big one of those. I remember going and doing events over in the Middle East, and even their days of the week that they do work are different than our days of the week. So there's different things to think about depending on where you are. Religions also come into play, and we'll talk a little bit about inclusive experiences and things that you can do for accommodating if you end up having an event during some type of high holiday or needing to accommodate things like a meditation or a prayer room. We also have lots of different personalities. I always love it when meeting planners get together. Meeting planner conferences are some of the funnest conferences that I think I attend, but there's a lot of other types of personalities out there. So how are we accommodating for those? Dietary needs is a big one. I think, over the years, this has become a really big focus for people, and dietary needs have completely changed from, I remember growing up and I was eating everything that was sugar-free and fat-free, and now so there's a focus on whole foods. So how are we shifting and looking at dietary needs as the industry changes when it comes to food? Learning styles. So this is another one where, there's a lot of talk in school in terms of adjusting content and learning styles so that people can learn whether they're an auditory learner or they're a kinesthetic learner, or they're a visual learner. So thinking about different learning styles and how we can apply that. And that also goes to approaches at work. I'm in sweats today at my office and in front of a computer where I will be all day for probably 14 hours today. But that may be very different from some of your other audiences that are in a suit and a tie and they're out there in the field and they're meeting face to face. So understanding approaches to work, there's a variety of different ways to think about how we can create these inclusive experiences. As a part of this, this is a very powerful stat, I think. There are over 1 billion people around the world with disabilities. So that's 15% of the world of people that are attending our events that may need some extra support, or we may need to think about different ways that we create experiences that allows us to support them while they're on site. And this expands beyond just in a typical ADA compliant type of standard. When you're thinking about planning for your attendees, this just isn't enough in terms of thinking in just in these terms. So we really need to think about how are we designing events that'll appeal to all attendees, and accessibility is a part of that. So when I first get started in planning and managing an event, you start with the goals and objectives and you know what you want to achieve. But I think an important part of designing inclusive design is putting yourself in the shoes of the attendee and really walking through the experience journey. I think this is one of the most important things that you can do because it helps you to plan better events. Because you may know internally there's certain things, certain messages you want to get across, or certain activities that need to happen. But ultimately, if your attendees join this event and don't leave feeling like there's business value, there's risk to your business that maybe they don't continue to be a customer or a member. Then there's also risk to your event because people aren't finding the value, and so they'll start to look for that value in other places. So I always like to move from the tactical execution, which is just, okay, we need to get food out, we need to have sessions, we need to have buses, the things that have to happen that are a big part of our job, but turning that more into a strategic discussion to say, what is the real value of our event and how are we designing all of the experiences so that people walk away with the best value? So one of the first steps in doing that is defining who is it that's actually coming to your event. So audience definitions are a great place to start. And this is always interesting for me because I'll go into an event and people will say, oh, it's the same as it's always been. And I'll say, okay, well, what has it's always been? And then 3 people in the room will all say something different. And I'm sure we've all been in that type of situation where it can help just for clarity's sake to sit down in a room and say, who is it that's really attending? So think of the job role that's coming. Maybe it is a decision maker that you're trying to attract. And there can be more than one type of role on site at an event. But let's just say decision maker. You'll want to define what does a decision maker look like in your event in terms of your company, your product, your customers. And then think about what are the titles of the people that are attending. Are they a C-suite? Because someone that's a C-suite attendee is going to want something probably very different than if they are a technology lead or if they're a developer. So you really have to think about what are the titles, because that will then help you to understand what do they do on a day-to-day basis and what are the types of interactions that are important to them. And as you think through your audience definitions and these job roles and the titles of the people that are coming, it's not just your standard roles, but also think about the different audiences that you want to accommodate. So within those, maybe there's a women in technology that, that I've seen a lot of companies coming out and focusing on that specific audience because they may have different wants and needs as a part of what they're attending for. Or maybe your alumni of your events, you want them because they've already attended. So if this is the 50th year of your conference and they've been attending for 20 years, how are you going to create something new and innovative and have them think, oh, this is moving in the right direction? And the same thing goes towards net new. They're brand new to this event, but maybe they've attended other industry events. How are you going to show them what's special about your event? So there are sort of these sub-audiences that go underneath your typical audiences. And so once you've defined those, then this is one of the funnest things for me to do, is to figure out what type of experiences do they want. And so then you have to really start to think about the questions that you want to ask. So now you can put yourself in the shoes and say, okay, I am a C-suite person, I'm a decision maker, and what do I want from the event? I'm going to show up at the airport, I am super busy, I'm on my cell phone right away, I've got conference calls going on, I've got key contracts I have to sign, decisions to do. And so what do they really want from this event? Do they want to be packed back to back and 10 hours of sessions a day? Or would they get more benefit from having strategic keynotes and figuring out free time of getting with other C-suite attendees and talking about business models and the changing priorities and how they're dealing with that? So really think about, if you were them, what would you feel on a day-to-day basis, and what was it that you would want out of this? And then how do we want them to feel? Because you can create different types of environments on site. You can also create different types of interaction in person to person. And then you want to think about the content. What do we want them to know? So not only do we want to sort of impart the knowledge that we want to share if there's something new, but what do they want to know? Like, put yourself again in their shoes. What is it that they would find valuable that then would help them move their business along? And then what do we want them to think? So as they attend, what is it that we want them to actually be thinking? What's the action item for afterwards that we want them to leave with? And then ultimately, what do we want them to do? So that combines with all of those things together. So as a part of this, you can start with a simple worksheet that just allows you to have your different audiences and roles, the industry definition, and then start to grid this out, because it's really interesting as you start to look through these in terms of what are the different attendees and how can we help them to have their best experience. This also helps you to create audience mapping in terms of how does your agenda lay out. So you have these different audiences. How is it that we could be laying out the different activities that they participate throughout the day to understand what does their day-to-day look like? Not only where are their segmented experiences where they're experiencing something directly, but how is it that we also are creating some shared experiences and looking at how we can leverage some of those to make a large impact across the broader audience? So there's a piece about this also about how do you go about learning about your audiences. And so when you're thinking of inclusive design and you have all these different roles, what are different ways that you can start to gather data that really help you to have some information around creating those experiences and creating something that's inclusive and goes across your entire audience? So registration is one way that you can start to pull together data. So one of the things that I find with registration forms is, yes, we have all the tactical information that we always need. So we need their name, we need their title, we need some of the demographic information. But think about if you had to limit it to 3 to 5 questions that would help you move the needle on creating inclusive experiences. What types of questions could you ask so that the data could tell you a story on, if you have limited budget, which area are you going to invest in this year? So think about what is the true information that you need and focus on those 3 to 5 questions that would really move the needle for you. When it comes to that inclusivity, also offer the space for attendees to confirm what needs they might have. So one of the things that we have done on events that we've worked on is we've changed this from having ADA checkboxes, and we've just talked about accommodations. I think when you think about someone on site and what they need to accomplish their goals, they may have certain accommodations that are needed in terms of maybe it's visual accommodations or hearing accommodations. Anytime the word disability is brought up, I think it puts a negative light to things. And so figuring out how to gather data on your registration form in a way that is all about providing the right accommodation. And this is a way that you can provide for an accessibility concierge in terms of how can you create an experience for someone that allows them to get their best use of time on site. So if you do have someone that has some mobility accommodations that they need, maybe they need to run a scooter, or maybe they are in a wheelchair, and so they need to understand what elevators they need to use and what the quickest path is. And so an accessibility concierge can be a great way of providing that white glove service to people that just need a little bit of extra information. And to give some idea in terms of size and scope and scale, even on very large events of 20, 30,000 people, the number of accommodations where people are reaching out and interacting can be pretty small, in the 20 to 30 people type range. So a lot of times when we talk about implementing these programs and asking these questions during registration, I think there's a fear and a hesitation of, oh, well, you know, we're going to get a lot of different requests and we won't be able to handle the volume. But I think if you approach it in the right way, you use the right terminology, that people start to really value having an accessibility concierge and being able to express what they really need. At an event that I was just at, nursing mothers was another big need. We were putting a focus on bringing more women to a technology conference, and so we had quite a few nursing mothers. So for them, it made a really big impact for them to say, will there be a new mother's room on site at this event, and that they had a dedicated concierge that they could ask that question to. So just in that one email exchange, we sort of set the tone for ensuring that they feel like their time on site is going to be utilized well. And reaching out to attendees directly, so that if you see that they are selecting certain things for accommodations on the registration page, just coming up with templates of being able to reach out to them to say, we see that you've selected this and you've given us these comments. Here's some resources that we think would be valuable to you. Is there anything else that we can assist with? Just in a simple outreach of an email that for the most part can be templated, can go a long way in creating that inclusive design and allowing your attendees to know that you really care about that audience and that you're wanting them to feel like a valued member of your community. And here's some examples of those personal accommodations and how they've been implemented across different registration sites. This is a great example of one where, you know, in this top section here, we've got different accommodations in terms of visual, mobility, or hearing. There's a question mark there that you can hover over that gives you some parameters of maybe what that means to your organization. And then also importantly, giving them a checkbox of being able to enter in specific requirements that allow your team to know how could you be evolving your events and how could you create a better environment for them. And later on in the presentation, we are going to go through a checklist and some concrete items as well for how you can turn this data into actionable items on site. So while we're getting to know our audience, the other big piece of this is using focus groups. And focus groups can be a combination of maybe past attendees. They could be current attendees where you're seeing certain trends or they meet certain needs, where you could just create a small meeting. You can have a go-to meeting and say, we're trying to create an experience this year that really helps you. Can you provide some feedback about what you found valuable? Where were there opportunities for improvement? And even use that as a sounding board to say, here's some ideas on things that we are putting together. What's your feedback on that? And I've used these focus groups in the past. You can use your valued partners. You could use your top customers. People tend to like to be a part of focus groups because it allows them a voice, and so they feel very valued. So focus groups typically are smaller in a 5 to 10 person range, but really allow for that interaction to be able to hear directly from them. And sometimes that can also be the ammunition in your back pocket that you need for creating these inclusive events, to be able to bring a perspective of actual audience members back to your board or back to your leadership team to say, this is what we are hearing, and this is why I am prioritizing some of these inclusive design elements or some of these experiential elements to help our attendees on site. The other way of learning about your audience is to find an audience champion. So sometimes at larger companies, this could be someone that's interacting with that audience on a day-to-day basis. If it's around accessibility compliance and some of the accommodations that you're wanting to put together, check within your HR team, because typically they'll have someone there that's a champion about accommodations and disabilities and how to deal with those in the workplace. So there is also ways that you can get in front of influencers. You know, there's a lot of industry influencers that value being a part and advising and talking about best practices. So I think there's a lot of resources on LinkedIn. There's some great event management groups that we can include as resources when we send out the copies of these slides, where just working with your peers and finding out what they're doing can be really helpful in figuring out your audience and how you can be a champion for them. And then this one, and you've heard me say this a couple of times throughout the presentation today, but walk a mile in the attendee's shoes. This is always something that is very fun for me, of saying, okay, I'm going to pretend like I'm a developer today. And so I'll go in and find someone that I can shadow, and I'll be a developer for the day. And I'll figure out, what is their work environment like? Are they talking on the phone? Do they use Skype the entire time? When they go to lunch, what are they doing? What are they eating? Are they communicating while they're eating? Are they sort of going off one by one? And then what type of work are they doing? Are they in front of a computer the entire time? So different ways of just putting yourself into their shoes to really figure out, what is it that they're doing on a day-to-day basis? And obviously you may not be able to do this with every single audience that is a part of your group. So that's where those audience champions come in. It's where those focus groups come in. But oftentimes, if you just put your thinking cap on, and I'll go on site visits, and I'll think, okay, I'm going to pretend to be this audience this morning. I'm going to walk through my agenda. I'm going to walk through the space like I'm them. What am I missing? So if I need to go take a quick conference call and I come out into the hallway, is there seating for me? Is there power for me to plug in my phone? At lunch, what am I going to want to do? Do I need a quick grab and go so that I can sort of be going to sessions and learning and trying to take full advantage? Do I need some seating to be able to network and talk with other people? So it's a really interesting thing to put the hat on of the attendee and really start to walk through, because you'll find some really good nuggets of gold that you would have never thought about when you're thinking from a tactical perspective of, can enough seats fit in here, or do I have enough room? So it really starts to change the story as you walk a mile in their shoes. The other resource that you have available to you in creating inclusive design is working with your extended vendor team. And this is something that I have always strongly believed in, and the power of utilizing the amazingly smart people around me when we're executing an event. So Chicago is a great example of a venue where we were investigating, what could we do for hearing accommodations. And so typically we would have to go out and we would work with our AV vendor to bring in headsets and be able to do different things to allow the hearing accommodations to have the right experience on site. And that could come at a pretty high cost. So I was talking with McCormick Place, and they said, you know what, Allie, we already have all of that done. We already have the headsets, we already have the audio tied in, and it's all just a part of what we do here at McCormick Place. And so just by having the conversation with the vendors that we were working on, I was able to bring something to the table that was of no cost, that allowed us to create a much better experience for those specific attendees. So I encourage you to work with your vendors to discuss inclusivity and to discuss some of your ideas and your goals for the year and see what they may be able to come up with. And if you're proactively communicating all of those needs, I think it also helps your vendors to set their own roadmap in terms of knowing that this is a priority for you. And the other way of doing this is bringing in vendors so that attendees can work directly with them if needed. So if this is something where you can change someone's experience by just providing them the information and providing them details that help them plan out their time. So for example, scooter rental is a great example of that, where we were just on site at an event and we had quite a few people that needed to rent scooters. We didn't rent them for them, we didn't pay for them, but we did talk with our vendor team and say, how can we make this easier for anyone that needs a scooter on site? Well, we were across 3 different buildings. This was in Orlando, so those of you that have been to Orlando know how big and massive that space is, millions upon millions of square feet. So as an attendee, put their hat on, went there and said, oh no, I showed up at the north building, but the scooter rental is in the west building. How am I going to get between there? And what does that look like? And so just by doing that simple activity, we were able to work with the scooter rental team and be able to say, we'd like you to have locations open at each one of our drop-off locations from our busings, so that as an attendee gets off the bus, they don't have very far to walk before they're able to get their scooter. That didn't cost us anything, but it made the experience so much better for those attendees. And shuttle transportation is another example. Is now if we can communicate with our shuttle company and say, here are the people that are utilizing scooters and wheelchairs. These are the hotels that they're staying at, and we know this because we've collected the data through registration. Now the transportation company at no extra cost can accommodate the need of getting wheelchairs onto the bus, have the motorized lifts there, be able to accommodate the power needed. So there's lots of different ways that if you start communicating with your vendors, you can end up having a lot of low-cost cost or already included solutions, but that completely transform that audience's need for on-site support. So, a couple of tips and tricks that we have learned over the years for inclusive planning. So these are some tactical but very specific considerations that when you're thinking about your accommodations on site, that they're just really good things to think about. So when it comes to hearing, speech, or language, and you're providing some type of, maybe you're providing translation services because you've got a large contingency coming from South America and you want them to have the right language, or maybe you're working with a sign language interpreter. There's ways that you can work with those suppliers to be able to provide the presentation content as well as a terminology document so that they can review all of that ahead of time. Oftentimes with transcriptionists, if they don't have advanced access to the content, or if they're not specialized in that specific vertical or industry, so maybe it's medical or maybe it's technology, they may not understand the terminology, and so they are not able to translate accordingly. So by having a meeting ahead of time with them, providing them as much advanced access to the content to allow them to ask questions around the terminology and the thought process, it can create a better experience for those attendees. And when it comes to sign language interpreters, making sure that you have reserved seating and especially lighting. Lighting is something that can be a big issue, whether it's in a keynote or a plenary session, or even in some breakouts, depending on how dark the lighting is. So you think about utilizing a sign language interpreter, you've got to be able to see their hands clearly. So this can be accommodated easily with your AV company. They can just add an extra light to the truss where they can focus in a specific area of the room to make sure that there's extra lighting there, and then also seats to ensure that they're accommodated. And then reserve seating for that clear sight line. So again, so that if anyone does have a need, that they're able to view that accordingly. When it comes to mobility, this is such an interesting thing that I'll let Nancy talk about a little bit because this is something that seems so simple, but totally changed the way that we looked at mobility on site and events of go to a big event and put yourself on a scooter and drive around and see how easy it is for you. Because it is not easy. It is hard to navigate. So this definitely goes into the experience design when you're thinking about what venues am I using and how am I going to navigate those venues. So not only as an attendee, you've got everyone in a keynote or plenary session, they're all going to leave and then try to go to these breakouts. Have I placed everything in the right area to not create congestion in the hallway? But as you're thinking about an inclusive design and you're thinking about people that may have mobility needs, can they get to where they need to go as well? And is there enough time to allow them to move between those sessions? So one of the things that we've done in the past is actually attend other events. It's not even our own event, but get on a scooter and go to that venue and try to get from point A to point B when it's really busy. Is there enough time? And then thinking again from the start of the experience throughout the entire agenda, but things like, is there enough accessible parking spots? Is there heavy or difficult to open doors? This was one where in Orlando we experienced this because they have fire doors on all their outdoor walkways between the buildings. So how can you have maybe your staff member, your directional member that's there on those walkways? How about they hold open those doors to make sure that the pathway is easy? Is there enough accessible bathrooms for people to use? Can they sit with colleagues? So another thing when you're designing inclusive design is you want to make sure that you're also not singling anyone out. So there is a balance in terms of creating the right experiences and the right accommodations, but also not making them feel singled out or ostracized. So think about putting yourself in their shoes of being on site. Can they sit with the right people? Can they navigate to the right places in the room? Can they still engage in all of the same ways that everyone else attending can? And then thinking about their experience. If they're going up to the registration counter, if they're going up to an information counter, are those counters and those table heights accommodating people in wheelchairs or scooters? Because you never want to be sitting down and looking up at someone. So how can you create a variety of even check-in desks where some of them are lower and some of them are higher so that you create some equality there in terms of being able to accommodate any type of user on site? From a vision standpoint, this is important to note about thinking about the colors that you're using in your signage. There was one year where we thought we were going to put stickers on the floor for people that were all in the right color so they could follow the color through to the right shuttle route. And then we quickly realized that that wasn't a very good option, because if people were colorblind, all they would see is variations on the tones. And so we had to combine both a number as well as color to make sure that everyone was able to get to the right areas. So thinking about the contrast and incorporating both visual as well as things like color as well as number. And then also there's some really easy checks that you can do online for accessibility in terms of making sure that your online tool and so they just need some time and space, or to a lot of attendees, or I'm sorry, not attendees, organizers, in terms of how we think about our attendees. But it used to be that a breakout session was the main piece of content. You'd have a keynote, you'd go into breakouts, and that was the only way that people looked at content on site. And what I love about where I'm seeing the industry going is we're taking a lot of the learnings even from schools and saying, okay, well, how is it that we can change this? So yeah, we have people that would love to sit in a breakout session all day, and that's how they're going to learn. But maybe we also have people that want to interact. How is it that we can provide hands-on learning so that maybe you're meeting with an expert and actually doing something live, or that you're meeting with a community of people and you're whiteboarding and talking about best practices? Or maybe we're creating bite-sized content. So maybe it's not an hour-long breakout session, it's a 20-minute quick session that, you know, you get little nuggets and bits and pieces that allow you to take that back and apply it easily. So thinking about learning and how it is that, how can you create those different type of learning experiences? And then even looking at personality differences of introvert versus extrovert. What are people wanting to do when they're on site? You know, if I'm meeting with a development team, and I say this with a lot of love because at Hub we have a lot of developers, so I spend a lot of time with them, but they're not the extroverts. They're not the ones that want to go out and party all the time and be put on the stage and have to present and do all these small groups. So they're more the introvert. How do we help them learn? So really thinking about learning as an inclusive activity as well. And then there's some ideas around other considerations, things that you're able to do that just make the experience better around every attendee. Making maps and documents available before the event so that, you know, sometimes I go to a convention center and I'm like, I don't know what building I'm in. I don't even know where I'm going. And I'm a meeting planner. So if I can't figure it out, then other attendees are going to have a really big issue trying to figure this out. So by trying to provide a lot of information ahead of time, it allows for those people that are planners and that do like to have the information to be able to plot out what they're doing, how they're doing it. It can create a better experience for them. And then when it does come to some of those sub-audiences and accommodations and inclusivity, I think seeking out that one-on-one engagement to ensure that people feel valued and heard and that we're helping them with compassion, it's one of the most important things that you can do is to help someone to get the best value out of their week. So thinking about how you can create those engagements. So when it comes to on-site, there's a couple of things. I mentioned meal planning. So on-site, Tara, at both pre-event and on-site, Tara is a wizard at creating those menu plans. So thinking about those menus in terms of the attendee experience journey. So we talked a little bit about trying to accommodate a variety of different dietary needs, but I think also what Tara does is she takes it into this whole experience journey and joining the inclusive crowd of what are people doing during the meal hour? So at a recent event that we were just at, Tara had several different buildings where we did have standard meal halls. This was for a pretty large event, but she also created grab and go stations in the expo hall where she knew that attendees were going to be there during the lunch hour because it was one of the dedicated times for people to go through the expo. So she knew that they would be there. So she wanted to create an experience that would allow them still to eat so they didn't get hangry, because that's totally a real thing. I get hangry almost every day. And so she created the grab and go stations, something very simple. It was very cost effective, but it allows attendees to be able to accomplish what they want to accomplish during that time frame. Paying attention to demographics and trends as well. I think we've all seen sort of this trend towards healthier food over the last couple of years, but that may change based on your demographic. Maybe you're meeting with a group that loves Cheetos and you know, ice cream. You know, you really just need to understand your demographics and see where the trends are happening there. Using registration again as a data point to learn more about food needs, putting some parameters around that, but understanding what is the expectation, what is it that people do need. I think also staying aware of local laws and requirements when it does come to your food. There's a lot of different things in regards to you know, how many hours can you leave things out when you're talking about experiential elements? Or there's also, when it comes to varying state to state, country to country rules, the local vendors can really help you negotiate that. When it comes to labeling, for example, so when an attendee is going through the buffet line and they are needing to understand what is in the food and every ingredient that's in the food, understanding what the laws are locally, but then also building on top of that, because if you think about putting labeling out on all of the different foods, that could change someone's experience. So now they feel like they can make educated decisions and that you're accommodating them by something as simple as printing out a labeled food card. So very simple ways on site of being able to look at your meal planning in an inclusive way. But moving on to accessibility and accommodations, we have Nancy Meadows with us, who is an accessibility specialist from Dynamic Events. And Nancy has spent the last couple of years and really focusing on that experiential journey. So I'm really excited to have her with us today. So Nancy, welcome.
Hi, Allie. It's my pleasure.
We're really excited that you're here today. So I've got some questions. I mean, I've been impressed with Nancy over the years because I've seen her get on that scooter and try to ride around and figure out the best way forward for some of these designs. So Nancy, when you think about accessibility plans, how do you translate those plans into a positive on-site experience? Like, what do you use as contributing factors to that?
You know, you have been touching on it all along in this entire webinar, and it is all about walking in other shoes. It's empathy, it's being able to kind of pull yourself out of yourself and put yourself into the feet, the shoes, the wheels of another person and understand their experience. I had some really eye-opening experiences in that regard on my very first event where I was helping with accessibility, and it completely changed the way I looked at every event following that. And it truly is. It's just about being able to see it from someone else's perspective.
So can you give us a little bit of details around what that experience was that sort of changed your perspective?
Oh, you bet. So Chicago, huge conference hall with lots of different floors and levels and variations. We had scooters available for those who needed help with mobility. And at one point during the conference, I had an attendee who was using a scooter. I'll call him Scott. He said, you know, I'm really struggling with this building. I'm not making it to sessions. This is a really frustrating experience for me. And I was just crestfallen because we had put so much work into it. Scott, can we sit down and talk about this? So he and I went to the lunch hall, we sat down and we talked, and he asked me, so how was it when you got in the scooter and went through the conference hall? And of course I hadn't done that, and I was just stunned to think, shoot, how could I miss this? And I said, oh gosh, you know what? I haven't done it. I'm going to do it. I will get back with you. So that afternoon, I got a scooter. I went out into the wilds of the conference hall in the middle of sessions and realized, oh my gosh, this was such a struggle. Suddenly, I was now at a level where, frankly, I was seeing belts and butts. I wasn't seeing signs or even access to elevator because there were people in front of me. And it got to where I found myself on a lower floor in a catering crew area. I had no idea where I was. I was about 10 minutes late for a meeting, and I abandoned ship. I jumped off the scooter and I went by foot, and I just realized, you know, Scott doesn't have that option. He can't jump off the scooter and just go find his way. So we met the following day, and I shared with him my experience. He was extremely gratified to see how much I struggled. And from then, he and I together devised a system, what we called the event buddy system, where I said, Scott, you know what I realized would have really helped me in that moment was to be able to pull out my phone, text someone and say, here's where I think I am. I need help. Can you help me? And he said, that would be amazing. So I had a gal named Summer who was working in the event force crew. I gave Scott Summer's contact info. She sent him a picture of herself and a hello. He sent her a picture and they said, okay, you're my contact. If I need help, I know I can reach out to you, and at the drop of a hat, you'll be available for me. And we implemented that moving forward in events, was to have an event buddy. And just a huge feel good and assist for someone to know that there is someone I can connect with and reach out to directly, a real human being who will talk to me and help me out.
And that's, I think, you know, a great example of how we do have temp staff for most events that are going on. We've got temp staff where we have our own event staff, where when we talk about low budget but high impact, that someone like that text buddy could be one of the temp staff that is helping with directional or helping with other things. But when they get a text from that buddy, that they're able to go and help them. So it's not extra headcount. It's not a really high expense, but it totally transforms that attendee's view and perspective.
Yes, yeah, and in fact, when we have used Text Buddy, to be honest, it very rarely actually gets used. It mostly is kind of just that safety blanket, that feel good, that just knowing that I have someone if I need them.
Right. Where do you find that with an inclusive program like this, that the majority of time goes into the planning? Is it in the pre-event? Is it on-site? Is it post-event with the feedback? Like, where do you find that the best level of effort is put into this?
It's definitely in the pre-planning. So absolutely having the concierge available to answer questions, because people who are coming to events who have a disability or have something that they know they're going to need some accommodation for, they're already planning in advance. So they're going to want to make that contact and know that there's the answer before they arrive. Absolutely, there's on-site kind of comes in second place. Being able to answer questions and be available. But if you've done your planning and communicating and connecting in advance, then the on-site is it's much simpler.
And is there a specific mindset when you think about the pre-event planning? And we've talked a lot about putting yourself in an attendee's shoes, but from a standpoint of what type of person is right in this role in terms of the pre-planning and the interaction, what do you think are the biggest success factors when thinking about creating inclusive design and having someone sort of oversee that program?
You know, we find that it's a person who's dual-fold, so someone who has great attention to detail, who will be following up on all of these little pieces and make sure it all comes together. But I would say even more importantly, someone who is willing and able to put on that empathy hat and say, if I were this person, what would I be looking for right now? And most of the time it's an interaction or a contact, so it could be just an email that talks in real and normal language, just like that you and I use every day, not something formal that seems like I'm getting, you know, a form letter, but something that says, hey, I know you're coming to the event and I noticed that you put this in your reg contact form and I really want to help you out with this. Do you have a minute to chat? Something like that. A person who is unafraid to go have real personal conversations with people, because it is that human contact that makes all the difference.
And so speaking of that human contact, what happens on site when things don't go as planned? If an elevator breaks or an escalator breaks or people are really upset, what do you find is the best way of dealing with that situation on site as you're thinking about inclusive programming?
It is absolutely in person, face-to-face, eye contact conversations with whoever it is. So for instance, in Scott's scenario, you know, I only learned about him through someone else who had heard a message and maybe from someone's tweet. It was very remote, but I sought him out and said, you know, hey, can we meet? And so then we did, got connected, sat down, looked each other in the eye and talked it out. And the escalation just diffuses drastically when you show up in person. So, you know, there was another event moment where we had literally a crowd of people who had gathered and were, you know, had a frustration, and showing up in person and talking again as a real person, just like you would talk to your neighbor or coworker and say, oh gosh, you know what, I totally see what the problem is here, and I am eager and ready to help you with this. How can we help? Immediately diffuses. So it's in person and it's genuine.
Yeah. And I think that just provides a great audience champion for you, right? I mean, if you can identify those people, you can talk with them, you listen to their feedback, and then you take that momentum going into the next year and actually have them in your focus groups or have them as a part of that audience champion. I think people really like to feel valued and feel heard. And if they can see even the smallest amount of movement, they know that it's going in the right direction and they had impact on that as well.
That is absolutely right. Being heard. And, you know, in our age of electronic and technology communication, you're never quite sure if you are heard when you send a message through an email or a text. So that in person is now like novel and refreshing, and feel, and you know, and it makes you feel a little bit exclusive. Like, you know, I got the red carpet treatment.
Yeah.
So hugely important.
Yeah, and I think that's, you know, when you're thinking about creating an audience experience journey and designing for the inclusive crowd and really thinking about how each person uniquely gets the best value, I think you're exactly right there in terms of wanting to feel like they are accomplishing what they need and that you are helping them support that, because any organization that's hosting an event is wanting that audience to move forward, whether it's buying their product or service or getting better value or being a part of a larger community. And so however we can make those people feel like they're being heard and listened, and that we're designing experiences around them, regardless of whether it's accommodations or whether it's around personalities or religious beliefs, it just helps them to feel more connected to the event. And I think that is the whole point around why events still happen face to face versus the robots taking over the world with only virtual events.
Right. Yeah.
Well,
Absolutely.
thank you so much, Nancy, for being here today and helping share some of your wisdom. I'm sure you could spend quite a few days in sharing different tips and trips and stories. So I appreciate your time today.
Oh gosh, totally my pleasure. This is absolutely one of my favorite topics, and you're right. So we'll wrap for today, but I'm always available to talk about this.
That's great. All right. Well, for me, when we do talk about tech, I always have to have some type of tech flavor because I do think that there's a lot of ways that tech can help us with our events. So when you think about different technologies, I was just on site at an event and it was fascinating for me because this event had over 1,000 sessions. So there were a lot of different sessions happening. And so we had a worldwide audience. We also had some people that had sign language interpreters. And so we were trying to think of ways that technology could help solve some of that. And so this was really innovative. And I think it's something that we'll start to see more and more happening. But all of the sessions were being recorded and they were fed to a captioner, which provided the live captioning in English, which some companies do as a normal part of their events. But what was really cool about it was that the text then was translated using artificial intelligence into 12 different languages. So because it had been transcribed into English, then technology was able to take that and translate it into 12 different languages so that when attendees entered the room, there was a sign with a QR code and a link that they could use to access the translation for that specific event. And so if they followed that from their phone or their computer, it basically was live text of the session in the language of their choice. So if you do end up hosting events with a worldwide audience, and maybe even in the past you've gone through the expense of translation booths and needed to translate into all different languages, that's a pretty expensive proposition. And I think there's really cool ways like this that we're talking about here of using tech to support inclusivity, where we were able to create that environment where regardless of the language or regardless of hearing capacity, that people were able to interact and engage with the content live. So just one way that tech can help as we think about how the future of events is going to change as we continue to build out in that experience design. So I know we're running a few minutes long. I always hate being in back-to-backs. It's almost noon Pacific time, so I'm hoping those in Pacific time are going to head to lunch. I think we're going to skip Q&A today since we are running a little bit long on time, but always open to questions. Also, you can hit us up on Twitter. At Allie Magyar is my handle on Twitter. We're happy to answer any questions that you might have. Appreciate your time today and look forward to continuing to bring you value by talking about how we can enhance our events as a part of our marketing portfolios. Until next time, thanks, Rainey.
All right, and thank you to everyone who joined today. If you have follow-up questions or anything you want, just send a note to Allie or marketing@hubb.me. And as a reminder, everything has been recorded and slides and link will be sent out in a couple days. So thanks and have a great day.